It's time to level up your learning experience.
It's time to level up.
Welcome to the Level Up Learning Show.
Hey, welcome everybody to the very first episode of the Level Up Learning Show. My name is Jared Borman. I'm an instructional designer with AA Learning Online. And this particular show is all about how can we take our current status of learning, whether we're a facilitator of learning, whether we experience learning environments themselves, and how do we take it to the next level. And for this first episode, we're going to be discussing blended learning. And so my goal is to bring in a co-host for every single show. And this particular show, we're bringing in fellow instructional designer, Melissa Wickland. Hey, Melissa, how's it going?
Hey, Jared. Hey, great to be here today, co-hosting with you.
It's always a pleasure to be chatting with you and bounce ideas off of one another. We discovered that we, in fact, have the similar mugs today. We both are rocking the Disney mugs. I got mine as a gift from one of my kids. And what's the story on your mug?
I gave this one to my grandma, and when she passed away, I got it back. So it's a pretty special cup.
The coffee is tasting good today. I got my setup here for our very first episode, and I'm excited to have you a part of the first episode. And to kick off each of these episodes, the format that I'm trying to follow here is I want to start off each episode with a show and tell. I want to take it back to the elementary days of where you're so excited to bring something to class, to stand up in front of all of your peers and the teacher and be like, hey, check out this really cool thing of mine, right? So this time, maybe next time when you're co-host, you can you bring a show and tell. But essentially what I'm trying to do is bring, I follow people on TikTok that are funny, or they're sharing those teacher stories that make you feel good, that sort of a thing. So I have one here that I want to share with you off of TikTok. This one is from TikTok user Gregisms. So Gregisms. So I think he's a teacher, and he is just, sharing a story time of something that happened that day in school. And I'm going to go ahead and share this with you and get your reaction from it, because I thought it was pretty funny.
Y'all, when I tell you I was this close to losing it on a kid today because of what he had said. So I'm teaching class. A little boy raises his hand and he says, Mr. Greg, you have something on the back of your head. Now, y'all, on the outside, I kept my cool, but on the inside, I pooped my pants, my soul left my body, and for some reason I immediately envisioned a tarantula, which we don't have in Louisiana. But all I said was, what do you mean I have something on the back of my head? To which he says, you have a spot. What in the melanoma? What do you mean a spot? To which he clarifies, a bald spot. The rage. Y'all, I am about to lecture this kid on how it is inappropriate to point out people's shortcomings when the girl next to him says, why would you say that? And he responds, because it's on the back of his head and I don't know if he saw it. Here I am thinking this kid's being a little jerk, and he's just concerned that I didn't see my bald spots. I was equal parts touched and forever embarrassed that this entire class just stared at my bald spot for 10 minutes. I simply said, yes, Mr. Greg is losing his hair. And you know what, young man? It might happen to you. It's no big deal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go make dinner and refill my Propecia. Find your joy.
I love Gregisms. They are hilarious.
There are just so many and honestly, there are so many teachers that is their TikTok account. It's just full of these mini moments that happen in the classroom that you literally just can't help but laugh at it. But I love what in the melanoma.
And Jared, there you are.
There I am. I'm back.
Yeah, Gregisms. He's one to follow.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one. There are a few other teachers that I'm going to share throughout, but I'm going to try to mix in the funnies, but also like the feel good ones, where they kind of surprise the janitor with a gift and stuff like that. Those things will go viral, so it's all a part of the educational life that I think we all can relate to. I know that I have teaching middle school, I got some stories.
Definitely.
And you taught elementary, right?
Yes. I was a fourth grade and first grade teacher, and then I did some technology coordinator work. So I worked with K through 8th graders.
So you probably, your daily life was kind of like that TV show, like Can't Believe What Kids Say.
Yes.
Yeah. They're pretty honest.
Especially when it comes to technology. They're either smarter than you or they want to be smarter than you with their tech.
Right. Well, speaking of technology, that kind of leads right into our topic for our first episode here. I know that blended learning it was a conversation that was happening before COVID.
Definitely.
There was, I know that I was a part of a lot of trainings, both as a learner and as a facilitator of learning. Blended learning is not anything that came about because of COVID, but I would definitely say that it got amplified.
Yes. We've been at AEA Learning Online. We have been teaching blended learning since 2014. And in 2020, May of 2020, we got extra busy. Schools were looking at how can we blend? How can we teach online? What does hybrid learning? What does online learning look like? Not only for high school students, but for kindergartners. So blended learning is not something new, but it definitely was amplified in 2020.
And the interesting part is, and I know that we had this conversation when I was back in the school district during COVID and that whole shutdown process, but then even after that, where the conversations were kind of like, now that we've experienced what the shutdown is like, you come back that following school year and things definitely aren't the same, but the conversation of what parts of this do we want to keep? What parts worked really, really well? And of course, when I say this, I'm talking about blended learning, but then also what are some of the parts that we feel like now that the majority of us could be back face to face, do we not necessarily need anymore? But we wanted to bring in an expert voice, someone that kind of has more of a bigger perspective. They work with a lot of different school districts, even outside of the state of Iowa, which is where we're located, but they could offer a bigger perspective a little bit. And we reached out to Matt Miller, the one and only, from Ditch That Textbook, as well as everything else that's grown from that particular piece of text. And he has grown a massive following, a massive tribe that he himself utilizes blended learning all the time. But more importantly, he has also built up a following of people that are trying to pay attention to some of the strategies that he's putting out there. And so I know that you've had an opportunity to listen to his new podcast that he's putting on with Holly Clark, right?
Definitely. Him and Holly just started a podcast. Let me get the name of it. Digital Learning Podcast. And they've really started to talk about some topics with blended learning, digital citizenship.
Yeah. And so we thought, hey, why not reach out to Matt and get his thoughts on this? And it led to a great conversation. And I think that's where we'll lead into exactly our conversation. And then we'll come back after our interview and give a little bit of a reflection. How's that sound?
Sounds wonderful.
All right. Here's Matt, our interview with Matt Miller of Ditch That Textbook.
It's time to level up.
The idea with blended learning, there's books out there about blended learning and there's working definitions of it. And so I guess in order for us to have a conversation about blended learning, we probably need to get on the same page as far as like, what do you define as blended learning and where do you see it in kind of the hierarchy of instructional practices that are going on right now?
Yeah. I see people sometimes, I think, oversimplify blended learning. And they say, oh, it's tech teaching and non-tech teaching. And it's like the combination of that. And there's some truth to that. So I don't want to like totally dismiss it. But I sort of see it as, you know, if you think back to the old school days when you had the computer lab, and the computer lab was another room a lot of times, right? Like for me, when I was a kid, it had the Apple IIgs computers and you had like number munchers down there and, Reader Rabbit and Oregon Trail. And, like all of those games were down there. And usually it was a totally separate thing. You would walk down to the computer lab and do your computer lab things. Then you would come back to class and you would go do your class things. And I think that's kind of the opposite of blended learning, kind of like putting the technology in a box or in a room in that case, but when we do blended learning, to me, it's kind of like saying, here are our goals. Here's where we want to go with learning. Here's what we want our kids to be able to do and experience and everything. What's the best way to get there? And we know that some of the teaching practices that we do that don't have technology have benefits. And so let's identify what those benefits are and how they can contribute to the goal. And some of the teaching practices that we do that do happen to use technology also have benefits. And sometimes one of them can kind of like lead to the other. So I almost see it instead of like I'm going to really mix my metaphors here. So like put your seatbelts on. Okay. Instead of seeing it as the computer lab is here and the classroom is all the way over here, I almost see it like it's kind of like a tapestry of sorts. See, like a tapestry and like the classroom, it's terrible, but go with me, okay? Like what we're doing is we're taking some of those things that we want to include in the finished product and we're weaving them together so that they stick and they make something great in the end. So, to me, a blended learning lesson might, for example, start with a little video clip that relates to something that kids are into that kind of hooks them in. And then maybe we do a really quick turn and talk. So now we're talking face to face and kids are communicating with their peers, not with their thumbs, but actually in an honest conversation. And then we maybe go to something like a Padlet where we're going to brainstorm all the things that we already know about this or some of our initial impressions. And then maybe we're going to go out on the web and we're going to do a little bit of independent research. And then we're going to come together and we're going to talk as a class about what we found and what we didn't find. And as you can see, from that example, there are pieces of technology supporting our goals, and there are pieces where our goals are being supported, but we don't need the technology. So anyway, that's a big long-winded answer to your short question of how you define blended learning. It's kind of a messy thing, I think, to define well, but I think those are some of the pieces of it, at least.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think that's kind of the working definition that we've gone by, because there are different models that you kind of tend to see being mixed in with blended learning, like flipped learning, station rotation, some of these other things that where you see those pieces of not just technology embedded, but the students utilizing it in a more cognitive way to help them move. And I think what we've really tried to emphasize, Melissa and myself, is don't see blended learning as necessarily using the tech tools to generate the cognitive engagement, but see them as tools to help get kids to move up the ladder of Bloom's taxonomy, right? Like get them into those upper levels and stay in those upper levels as long as you can. So that way they see the value more in your own classroom. So, I think, blended learning could be that bigger umbrella, but then you have these other smaller models that support that idea of not just using the tech, but how do we build the foundation of the cognitive engagement and then build up from there.
Yeah. And I think that you highlighted something that hopefully is a little more of an older way of thinking and not so much now, but I kind of fear that it is sort of the thinking sometimes in classrooms today, is that technology is an engagement strategy in and of itself. Kids like tech. Tech is inherently engaging. If you put technology into things, like kids are going to be, that's all it's going to take to do the engagement piece. The engagement piece is taken care of by itself. And like, I think with anything, there is a novelty factor on certain things. And I think especially when technology was just making its way into the classroom, you introduce a piece of technology and you get the novelty factor big time. And you get a little bit of extra attention. You don't necessarily, Jared, like you were mentioning, you don't necessarily start to walk your way up, the scale of deeper thinking by introducing that technology, but you definitely do get a little bit of that attention. And I don't think we can look at it that way. And especially since the remote teaching and learning and all of the trauma that came out of that, I think it's kind of the opposite. I'm starting to hear more and more teachers, not like the plugged in, totally tech loving teachers that you meet on Twitter a lot of times, but like your regular classroom teachers, I'm hearing more and more of them say, I don't want to use technology as much. I'm going to start putting the technology away. I've even heard of entire schools that are saying we're going to move away from technology. And that's where you start to look at it as like this monolith where it stands for something by itself, but really I know we use the tool analogy all the time, but it really is a tool that you can use to do all sorts of things. The problem during remote teaching and why it was so bad was because we were using that tool in terrible ways. I love to use the, like the woodworker analogy, because woodworkers depend on lots of specialized tools. And if you're a woodworker that's like, I just bought this new hammer. What can I make with a hammer? I'm really good with this hammer. Like, tell me all the things I can do with a hammer. And you start banging on things with that hammer, you're going to make a mess. And things aren't going to be better. If you want to make something, beautiful and well crafted, the hammer cannot be your go-to tool to do all of your things. And I think we started just like grasping at tools wherever we could. And I don't fault people for doing it, because we got in that position where, oh my goodness, it's Saturday or Sunday and I have to teach fully remotely on Monday. What in the world am I going to do? So I don't fault the teachers who just tried to survive. They were put in a position where they just need to survive. But as we go forward, I don't think we can discount and throw out technology and blended learning because of the trauma that we had with doing it so poorly and what it did to teachers and what it did to kids. So anyway, I know that was just kind of like a passing thought from you, like that technology can't just be engagement by itself, and it can't be the thing all by itself. It really is another thing that we can weave into good, solid teaching and learning. And if we don't keep good, solid teaching and learning at the heart, we're kind of getting the cart before the horse.
I know that Melissa, when you talk about the use of technology and creation, I know Melissa, she had heard a podcast. You and Holly Clark have your own podcast, correct?
Yeah, we just started it. It's called the Digital Learning Podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Melissa was listening to an episode, and she was listening to something that you were talking, or that you guys were talking about, called the creator economy. Melissa, do you want to I don't know, you heard the podcast. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. Do you want to ask them about that? Because that was kind of interesting to hear.
I really enjoyed your conversation with Holly, and you started talking about blended learning, and Holly brought up creation, that's really a building block of blended learning. And you talked about the creator economy. Can you go into that for our audience about the creator economy? Because I think it's a thing that we need to start thinking about of those kindergartners. I think that we're going to retire in 2087 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holly dropped that statistic on me during the show too. And I was like, how do you expect me to keep talking when I have this in my mind? Like it blows me away. That's something that she's been talking about a lot recently. And if that's the case, if that's when they're supposed to retire, like how in the world do we prepare them for that world for all of those years where we have no idea totally what exactly it's going to look like. But one thing that we can do is to kind of keep that creator economy in mind. And so here's sort of the gist of it. That if you think in the past, especially, I know a lot of times like keynote speakers and education pundits like to make the Industrial Revolution comparisons. And there's something to that, like for years and years, it was all about creating, good factory workers that'll come to school and will create things with I'm mixing my metaphors again. Anyway, in the school setting, you come to school, you sit down, you listen, you do what the teacher tells you, and then you leave, which prepares you for a factory job where you come to work, you turn widgets 1/4 turn all day long, and then you do what you're supposed to do, and then you leave. And of course, now we're sort of into a different place where that rote, repetitive, type of work where you follow the rules and then you go home is not so much there. And now there's all of these opportunities for people to create. And when I say create, you might think about having like an Etsy store or like making stuff and selling it on eBay or something, or on Amazon. And that's part of the creator economy. But another part of it is creating things digitally. You've got video creators, you've got content creators. I mean, I even sort of fall under that because a big part of my life right now is making things on my blog and creating videos and making online courses and all of that. So we're creating in that way too. We're starting to get into, non-fungible tokens, the NFTs. That's part of the creator economy too. And so if more and more people are making their living by creating things that you can't touch with your fingers, we've got to sort of acknowledge that. And we also have to acknowledge that the tasks and the abilities that it takes to create those things really speak to some of that higher order thinking too. I've seen people, rework and redesign Bloom's taxonomy in a variety of ways, and I see a lot of times create is right up at the top of that. And, if you think about it, and design thinking plays into that as well, to be able to empathize and to ideate and to create and refine. And, there's that whole loop that you go through and everything. There's a lot of deep thinking that goes into that. And so when that starts showing up in our lessons, and, if we're talking about blended learning, if we're incorporating technology to make that process more efficient, or to disperse our ideas to a wider audience, or to create things digitally that we couldn't create without the technology. Like those are some of the, so some of the most compelling cases for blended learning, in that we are doing what the Sammer model years ago talked about as redefinition, creating opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. So the creator economy, I think, is a really good thing to keep in mind. Even as we do like our day-to-day lessons, to say, what can kids create with what they've learned to show what they know? My goodness, on my blog and in my workshops and stuff, I say that, I'm just now realizing it. I say that statement, what can kids create to show what they know? I say that statement all the time. It's kind of at the heart of, everything that I believe in education, that instead of filling out a worksheet to show what you know, and how much are you really showing that you know when you fill out a worksheet? Let's make something with it. And then we're also preparing kids for that creator economy of sorts.
And I think when we think about that creator economy, I think you brought up a great thing, that it doesn't always have to be on a computer, right? It can be digitally for those kids that need that space to create, but we can also be tactile. Some of those students still need that physical creation.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about blended learning, and we're talking about blended creation, hands-on, face-to-face things, and also digital things.
Yes.
I think that leads into the next question that I think most, at least what we get in our training, is this idea of this new, it's not even really new, but this methodology of teaching and learning, and how to take our classroom experience to the next level. Mm-hmm. Sounds great, but I'm still, as a classroom teacher, held accountable for the assessment as well. So how do I take this methodology? Because let's be honest, Matt, the worksheet is really easy to assess.
It is so easy.
And in the world of my having a finite amount of minutes in the day as a classroom teacher, sometimes that's what makes the most sense to me. But I want to be able to get my kids to that next level of learning. And so how does assessment play a role in that? Yeah.
In the blended learning, it makes, okay, so my mind bounces to about a dozen different places right now. It can do a number of things. For one, let's start real sort of low level and easy. Like the way you were doing assessment before, if your version of assessment is, let's do worksheets and multiple choice quizzes and, maybe a test at the end, it can make that more efficient. Technology can make it more efficient. And honestly, I think sometimes people hate on this stuff, but there is really a benefit in making those kinds of things more efficient. One of the hallmarks of great feedback is that it's timely. So if you can turn some of those lower level assessments into auto-graded quizzes or auto-graded activities on like the Quizzes game or on Quizlet or Quizlet Live or something like that, you're getting kids that immediate instant feedback, which is better than the traditional worksheet, where if you think about it, you assign that on a Tuesday. Students work on it Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, hopefully. They turn it in on Wednesday, hopefully. And then that evening, again, hopefully you have enough time to grade it, and then you hand it back on Thursday. From the moment it's assigned on Tuesday, kids don't get feedback on it until Thursday if everything works out perfectly. And we know in a classroom, not everything happens exactly as quickly and efficiently as it could. So really, we're sort of like speeding up the timely feedback by automating some of it. So low level, if we take a more blended learning approach to assessment, that's one place where kids benefit. Now, I think if we continue to go beyond that, again, the speed in which we get some of the data from assessment also helps us do great formative assessment. Because of course, formative assessment is showing how students are forming their understanding and their learning. And that is valuable data for us if we will collect it and use it. And so if we do, I'll give you, again, sort of a simplistic version of this, but if we do like a quizzes game over some of the key concepts that we've been talking about, and students take that quizzes game, as soon as it's done, right there on the teacher's screen is data. And you can take that data. This is one of the things I love about quizzes. You can take that data, you put it up on a projector screen or on an interactive display, and you hit the questions tab, and it shows all of the questions, and it shows them in red or orange or yellow or green. And you can see which ones students really got and which ones they didn't, which means you can go immediately and sort of have a reteach or ask students some questions or do some follow-up work on it because you have that data in hand immediately. So that's another place I think that it plays into assessment, is that it can allow you to course correct and you can sort of like adjust. But then, if we start to go bigger picture on assessment, like what do we truly know that kids know and are able to do? Again, we could get into that creation part again. What can students create to show what they know? They have lots of new options to be able to create with that. And then we're able to turn around and kind of like provide them feedback on that. We could really kind of go on and on and on. Those are just a few of them off the top of my head. I don't know if you guys have anything else to contribute to that, but those are the first ones that come to mind for me, at least.
And I think at least in my conversations with educators, and I know Melissa's been in similar conversations, so I won't necessarily speak for her and her experience, but you try to break down, be like, and first question I ask an educator is, well, are you talking about formative or are you talking about summative? Mm-hmm. And then you try to parse those two out. And just what you were talking about when we're talking about the formative assessments and how to course correct and all of that. And I'm going to come back to the word automate that you kept using, because I had an interesting conversation about that particular word a couple of years ago. But when it comes to the formative assessment, using that course correction is powerful. But going back to what you were also saying about the creator economy, yeah. You were almost kind of saying, and I've said this too, is I don't care how you show me you know it, just show me you know it. Yeah. And that could be a number of different things. And so that kind of gets to the idea of more of the summative side, where we're not necessarily, I know Melissa and I in the training have told teachers, we can't tell you what the summative assessment is. It really depends on what is the unit, what is the content, what knowledge are you trying to pull from the students, and doesn't necessarily need to be the same summative assessment for all of them. Or are you getting to a place of comfortability with facilitating your learning, where you simply get to this mindset of just show me you know it. I don't care how you do that, just show me you know it. Mm-hmm. And if a student can do that with method A, awesome. If another student does it with method B, fantastic. Because when a lot of schools, at least in the state of Iowa, but I know across the nation, are moving to the standards-based grading system and kind of getting away from just the simple A, B, C, D, F system, what I feel has allowed a lot of educators in the state of Iowa to do is simply say, here's the standard, just prove to me that you are proficient in that standard.
Sure.
And that kind of opens the door more for the summative assessment side. I don't know, Melissa, if you have anything else to add to that one, but that's kind of what I've seen.
I think the formative assessment is something that teachers can grasp a little bit easier. I think, Matt, you brought that up with quizzes. You know, they can put that up there for students to see whether they're in elementary, middle, or high school. And that really can get those teachers and students talking about what they know, how they can move forward, and what kinds of reteaching we need to be doing. And there's all kinds of options out there. They can use Padlet, quizzes, all kinds of tools.
Yeah. And Jared, you were just talking about summative assessments when you get down to the end there. And it's easy. And you were just saying, I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I saw one, what I thought was one really good small shift to move in the right direction with summative assessments to answer that question you were just posing of just show me what you know, however you do it in whatever way. So I think if teachers want to make a shift in that direction, here's one little thing that I think you can do. If your summative assessment still is sort of like a traditional test, because you still got lots of people that will use a traditional test as the summative assessment for a chapter or a unit. If that's the case, I saw somebody add this one question to the end of a test that I thought was fantastic, that empowers kids to show what they've really learned, but it also sort of like humanizes the test. And here was that question. Are you all on the edge of your seats to find out what question can really do that? Okay, here's what it's not really a question. It's sort of a prompt. And it says, tell me everything that you know that wasn't asked of you on the test. Just like a paragraph style question at the end of the test. And so the student, if they want to, puts all the things in there that weren't asked on the explicit questions on the test. And so that empowers them to sort of take learning into their own hands. And it also puts the onus on them to show what they're learning instead of just having all these questions imposed on them by the teacher. It kind of turns it in the opposite direction. And then for the teacher, it's a little bit messy to grade this as a teacher. Because if you had, when I was teaching high school Spanish, I still used lots of traditional tests, and they were usually out of 50 points. And so if I had all of these questions all throughout the test, and if I had known about this question when I was teaching Spanish and I put this question at the end, then I would have had to look at that and go, okay, based on what they just showed me, I'm going to have to look at the score and the questions that they missed and all of that to get sort of a general understanding of what their kind of like what their proficiency was in that subject. Now, in light of what they just wrote into that question, all of their answers on that one, show me everything you know question, I'm going to have to adjust their grade to kind of like have an overall big picture of what I feel like their proficiency is. So there's a bit of subjectivity to it. And some people don't really like that. But then again, shouldn't our assessment of learning be sort of subjective? Whenever we leave it to the percentage of a bunch of questions, which may be kind of like gotcha questions, like, oh, you understood pretty much everything, but haha, I got that one that you didn't know. Gotcha. Does that really show proficiency? Like what's really a good, accurate understanding of where kids really are? So that was one thing that I really liked. And if somebody's listening to this today and they want to take one small step in the direction of more meaningful summative assessments, that's one thing that I kind of like.
I love everything a bit about that interview. That was so much fun to do. So now that we've talked to Matt Miller, how about you and I do a quick reflection? So what was like, so for us, we want to make sure that we're modeling this concept of leveling up the learning, right? So we ourselves are learners, we experience learning, but being with AEA Learning Online, we are also facilitators of learning, specifically online learning, although we do some face-to-face stuff as well. So the question becomes, how do we level up our learning experience? Maybe the experience that we're providing others. And in this case, the blended learning or blend flip cohort that we're looking to try to revamp. So I guess, what is a big takeaway for you in what Matt said and what you're thinking about how that how we could take that particular course and level it up.
I think one thing that really stuck out to me that Matt talked about was in the assessment portion, when he talked about empowering learners and that last question that teachers can ask at the end. I think the question was, tell me everything you know that wasn't on the test. That's a powerful question, Jared. And for some of our learners that may not do well on multiple choice questions, that can open many doors for our learners.
And I know that, I've joined the AA Learning Online team just this year. And you said you've been kind of leading the charge since 2014 for this particular course, the blended learning course. And so you've gotten feedback over the years. And I would imagine, like, what's been some of the biggest feedback in like us wanting to revamp this course? I know that one of the main goals that we're trying to do is make it more self-paced, right?
So, 2020 happened and we had lots of participation right as COVID started, but teachers were not in the classrooms. They were teaching online. They were teaching their students. And since that time, there's been kind of a sub shortage, and we're seeing more teachers having to be in schools, and they want some flexible learning that they can do on their own time. And so having that self-paced option for teachers, I think, is going to be a great learning opportunity for them. And so we're trying to empower our learners, which are teachers, to show what they know with blended learning and how they can implement that in their classroom real time and with some concrete ideas.
Yeah.
And so we're really looking into revamping it that way.
One big takeaway for me was the creator economy. Like Gary Vee, I know, is a very popular TikToker that has built a conglomerate in the following, utilizing social media and so forth. And he talks often a lot about the creator economy and what that's doing, and the learning experience for kids as well. And so when we try to create and design effective online curriculum and courses, how are we promoting that creator economy, even for, let's say, if our main audience is teachers, right? Or educators or administrators, not just kids, but how are we modeling that even with our adult learners is kind of a big question that I've started storing around in my head a little bit as we think about how we can revamp the course to meet the learning needs of all of our learners today, not just the kids. And there you have it, guys. First episode in the books. Be sure to check out links to all of the resources that were talked about in this particular episode at aelearningonline.org, or you can follow us at any of the bits of social media that we have. When you're there, go ahead and like and follow and comment. Just give your thoughts and perspectives on anything that was presented in any of the episodes that we have going on. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Level Up Learning Show.